My name is Danielle Hollister, and I'm 36. 5 days after we buried my mother, my brother changed the locks on the house I grew up in and left my daughter's things out on the front steps in the pouring rain. Piper's little sneakers were soaked straight through. Her stuffed rabbit lay face down in a puddle. And there stood Trevor in the doorway, our dad's doorway, the doorway of a house that had belonged to this family since 1901, telling me I was nothing. "The land goes to the Hollister son," he said. "Daughters get married off. You should have figured that out a long time ago." He didn't stop there. He said I ought to get used to being homeless. He said he'd made sure I'd walk away with nothing. But here's the part Trevor never saw coming. That will had one last section nobody had touched yet. And when the lawyer read it out loud, when he announced my net worth to a room full of people who'd spent my entire life calling me the leftover kid, my brother hit the floor. If you've ever been the child a family forgot to count, the spare one nobody planned for, then stick with me, because this one is for you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and go ahead and subscribe if quiet people finally getting the last word is your kind of thing. Now let me take you back to Ashford Bend, Ohio. Maybe 6,500 people on a good census. It's a river town, the kind where the Hollister name used to mean something. The Hocking runs down into the Ohio right there, and Ashford Bend is the sort of place where folks know your grandfather's first name, your credit rating, and which pew your family claims on Sunday morning. The Hollisters put up half the houses along River Street. My great-grandfather opened the shop, Hollister and Son Woodworks, back in 1952, and the hand-carved walnut sign still hangs on Mill Street to this day. My dad, Walt Hollister, ran that shop for 34 years. He was gifted with his hands and hopeless with his daughters. I say daughters, but there was only one of those, and that was me. Then there was Trevor, 6 years older, the firstborn boy, the one whose name matched the sign out front. Growing up, the split in our house was simple. After school, Trevor went to the shop, and I went to the kitchen with my mother, Gail. Trevor learned to joint boards and read blueprints. I learned to bake casseroles and stay quiet. My father had a line he repeated like scripture. Every Thanksgiving, every time the property taxes came due, every time somebody asked about the business, out it came. "The land stays with the Hollister boy. Daughters marry out." He said it the way you'd say water runs downhill. Not mean about it, just stating a fact. My mother would tighten her lips and pass the mashed potatoes. I'd stare down at my plate and count peas. When I was 14, I asked my dad if I could come work in the shop on Saturdays. He looked at me like I'd asked to tear the wiring out of the walls. "What for?" he said. "You won't be sticking around." I left Ashford Bend 3 years later with one duffel bag and a flat carpenter's pencil he'd handed me when I was 8, the kind with the wide graphite core. He'd slid it behind my ear one afternoon and said, "There, now you look like a Hollister." That was the only time those words ever left his mouth pointed at me. I put myself through the University of Cincinnati. An accounting degree first, then a master's in forensic accounting, the kind of work where you chase money through fake companies and phony invoices until you corner the person who thought they were slicker than a spreadsheet. Turned out I was good at it. Really good. By 27, I was at a firm in Cincinnati, cracking open fraud cases that made the local news. By 30, I'd hung my own shingle Hollister Forensic Group. 4 employees, then 10, then 26. I built it out of a rented office over a deli on Grant Avenue, and I built it by myself. Trevor called my career the calculator job. My dad called it something to keep you busy until you settle down. My mom just asked if I was eating enough. Nobody in Ashford Bend knew what forensic accounting even was, and nobody wanted to. At family dinners, when Trevor went on about expanding the shop or his plan to flip spec houses, my father leaned in and nodded along. When I brought up wrapping a 7-figure fraud case for a Fortune 500 client, he'd say, "That's nice, Danielle, pass the rolls." So I stopped bringing it up. I quit mentioning the firm, the clients, the growth. I kept that carpenter's pencil zipped in the inside pocket of my bag, a flat little bar of cedar and graphite that smelled like the shop, like sawdust in my dad's hands. I carried it everywhere. Not because I missed him exactly. Because it reminded me what a Hollister was supposed to be and how quietly I'd turned into one. By the time I sold off a majority stake in the firm in 2022, my net worth had climbed north of $6 million. My family figured I rented a one-bedroom and drove a Honda because I couldn't afford anything nicer. I drove the Honda because I liked it. Nobody ever asked. Not once. My father died 15 months ago. Heart attack. He was standing at the planer on a Tuesday morning, feeding a slab of white oak through the blades, and his heart just quit. The paramedics said he was gone before he even landed. I got the call at my desk. My business partner, Renee Bishop, drove me down because my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to hold a wheel. When I got there, Trevor already had the living room going, taking condolences, shaking hands with the Lions Club men. He'd put on a blazer. He looked like a guy who'd been rehearsing that role his whole life. I took care of everything else. The funeral home, the death certificates, the insurance calls, the church bulletin. My mom was too gutted to function, and Trevor was too busy being the grieving son in public to do any of the actual grieving son work in private. I didn't complain. That's my thing, I guess. I spot a gap and I fill it. I see a job nobody wants and I pick it up. My therapist has a name for it. Overresponsibility. The habit of hauling everything yourself because nobody ever taught you it was safe to set anything down. A little while after the funeral, I noticed something. My mother went alone to a meeting with Harold Prout, my parents' estate attorney, at his office on Mill Street. She came home quieter than usual, but steadier too, like a woman who'd made up her mind about something. I asked if everything was all right. She patted my hand. "Your father's affairs are complicated," she said. "Harold's untangling it." I let it go. I shouldn't have. But I had Piper to get back to and a firm to run and a mother who clearly wanted to carry this one thing by herself, so I let her. My mom had a stroke 5 weeks ago. She was out in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed she'd tended since before I was born, and something inside her head gave out. A neighbor found her face down in the marigolds. She was gone 3 hours later at Ashford County Medical. I was in the car within 20 minutes of the call. Piper sat in the back watching the farmland smear past the window, saying nothing, because 6-year-olds can feel when a thing is too big for words. The service was at Trinity Methodist, where 4 generations of Hollisters had been christened and buried. 120 people showed up. Trevor gave the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car and talked for a solid 10 minutes. He talked about carrying the family name. He talked about the shop. He talked about what it meant to be a Hollister son, standing where his father and grandfather had stood. He mentioned my mother's cooking. He mentioned her garden. He did not mention that she'd spent the last 15 months alone in that house, carrying a grief she never should have had to carry solo. He did not mention me at all. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, my Aunt Diane, my mom's younger sister, pulled me off to the side and squeezed my arm. "Lovely service," she said. "Your father would have been so proud of Trevor." I nearly laughed. I didn't. At the coat rack, while I was zipping Piper into her jacket, a man in a gray wool suit stepped up beside me. Harold Prout, 68 years old, dry as chalk, the kind of lawyer who doles out words like a pharmacist counting pills. "In town," he said low. "Your father revised the will after your brother's troubles. You'll want to hear it, both of you together." Then he gave one nod and walked off. 5 days after the funeral, Trevor called me. I was in the kitchen of my parents' house, my mother's house, stirring oatmeal for Piper. The morning light came through the window over the sink the way it always had, flat and gold, catching the dust in the air above the counter. "I need you out by Friday," Trevor said. No hello, no how are you. Just the demand, like a contractor setting a deadline. "Excuse me. The house, it's mine. Dad made that clear for 30 years. Probate's just paperwork. Prout will back me up. I need you and the kid gone so Bryn and I can start the remodel." The kid. He called my daughter the kid. "We haven't even had the reading yet," I said. "Nothing to read. You know the rule. The land goes to the Hollister son. You left. I stayed. That's the whole conversation." I could hear his wife Bryn in the background, her voice bright and sharp. "Tell her Friday at the latest, babe." I gripped the edge of the counter. Piper watched me from the table, spoon halfway to her mouth. "I'm not leaving until Prut reads the will," I said. "Then you'll leave with nothing." And I want you to catch this exactly because he said it like he'd been polishing the line for years. "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Danielle. I made sure you get 0. He hung up. I set the phone face down on the counter. I finished the oatmeal. I sat across from my daughter and I ate, because that's what you do when somebody tries to yank the ground out from under you. You dig your heels in and you eat your breakfast. That evening, I tried my key on the front door and the lock had already been swapped out. The brass key on its cracked leather fob, the one my dad had handed me at 18 saying, "For when you come home," turned in the cylinder and caught dead. I walked around back, and the boxes were already on the porch. 3 cheap cardboard moving boxes from the hardware store on Depot Street. Piper's clothes, my suitcase, my mother's recipe tin, the one she'd promised me, packed with index cards in her handwriting going back 40 years. All of it sitting in half an inch of rainwater on the boards where my mom used to drink her morning coffee. Bryn opened the front door. She was wrapped in some cream cashmere thing, holding a glass of wine like she was hosting a gallery opening. "Oh," she said, looking me over the way you'd look at a delivery guy who came to the wrong address. "You're still around." "Where's Piper's room?" I asked. "Where are her books?" "Trevor packed anything that was yours or hers. This isn't really her home, Danielle. She's been here, 4 times?" She said it like a map decided who belonged, like a 6-year-old had to earn a spot in her own grandmother's house. Something clicked into place behind my ribs. Not anger exactly, clarity. I carried the boxes to the car, loaded the trunk, buckled Piper into her booster. Then I came back to the porch. Bryn was still standing there, sipping, watching me like it was a show. "Keep the locks," I told her. "Keep every room in this house, but you will not say another word about my daughter. Not to me, not to Trevor, not to a single person in this town. That's not me asking." Her smile thinned out. She stepped back inside and shut the door. I got in the car. Piper was hugging her damp rabbit against her chest. "Where are we going, Mom?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet, I just drove. We landed at the Cedar Rest Motel out on Highway 12, a mile past the town line. $54 a night. 2 double beds, a microwave, and a window looking out over the parking lot toward the river. Piper decided it was an adventure. She bounced on the mattress and asked if we could get pizza. I said yes because anything else would have cracked my voice open. I sat on the edge of the other bed and stared at my phone. I had a condo in Cincinnati, a good life there. I could pack Piper up, drive 2 hours, and never touch Ashford Bend again. Let Trevor keep the house, the sign, the shop, the whole crumbling little kingdom. I didn't need any of it. I'd built my own. But Prut had said stay. My mother had gone to see him alone and come back looking like a woman who'd finally set down something she'd carried for decades. I owed it to her to hear whatever this was. And honestly, I'll be straight with you. Ashford Bend was the only place Piper had ever known her grandparents. The backyard with the marigolds. The river trail where my dad used to take me fishing on Saturday mornings, back before he decided I wasn't worth the time. The 22 acres out behind the property, down by the water, where the old boathouse sat under a stand of sycamores. Piper loved that land. She called it the River Place. So I stayed. Not to fight, not to win anything. I stayed because Prut asked, because my mother would have wanted me to hear it, and because my daughter deserved to know this town the way I once had, before the Hollister name became something that only counted if you were born a boy. Harold Prut's office sat on the 2nd floor of a limestone building on Mill Street, 3 doors up from the shop. The stairwell smelled like old paper and lemon oil. His desk was walnut, built by my grandfather. Behind him, the shelves held 40 years of Ohio statutes and a framed photo of him shaking my dad's hand at some Lions Club dinner in the 90s. "Sit down, Danielle," he said, waving at the leather chair. He didn't bother with small talk. I liked that about him. "The formal reading is next Thursday. You and Trevor are both required to attend. Your father's will has a provision that can only be carried out with both children present. I'm the executor. Those are the terms. I leaned forward. Harold, what did my father change? He folded his hands, the way careful people do when they're picking their words. After your brother's business troubles, after your father co-signed certain obligations and restructured some debts, Walt rewrote a section of the will. He attached a condition to one specific asset. Which asset? The back acres. The 22 acres along the river, boathouse included. My chest went tight. The river place. What kind of condition? The kind that requires both beneficiaries to submit a verified financial statement before the asset can be awarded. Your father wanted proof. Documented, certified proof that whoever takes that land can hold on to it without leveraging it, mortgaging it, or handing it to creditors. He paused. Your father learned something, Danielle, late in the game, but he learned it. Learned what? Prout picked up a heavy silver pen and tapped it once on the desk. That the loudest man in the room isn't always the one you trust with the keys. He stood. Thursday, 10 a.m. Bring your documentation. Trevor and Bryn moved into the house within 2 days. By the weekend, they'd torn out my mother's kitchen cabinets, the ones my grandfather built, solid maple with dovetail joints, and swapped them for flat-pack modern ones out of a catalog. Bryn posted the photos online. New chapter honoring the legacy by making it ours. Dozens of likes. I drove past the shop on Monday and saw a handwritten sign taped in the window. Estate sale, tools and equipment. Everything must go. My father's tools, his draw knives, his hand planes. 34 years of carefully kept steel, every piece oiled and hung in order on the pegboard. Trevor was unloading it like garage sale junk. I parked across the street and sat there 10 minutes, engine running, watching strangers walk out with my dad's chisels in plastic bags. I almost drove off. Almost. Then I spotted it, shoved against the back wall behind a stack of scrap lumber. My father's toolbox. The old green metal one with the dented lid and the brass latch. The will had left it to me specifically. Personal hand tools and toolbox to Danielle. The one thing with my name on it. I walked in. Trevor was at the counter counting cash. He looked up. You're not welcome here. That toolbox is mine, I said. Dad's will names it, you know that. He stared at me a long moment, then shrugged. Take it. It's junk anyway, just like everything else he left you. The box was heavier than I expected. I carried it out with both arms and set it in the trunk beside Piper's car seat. Something slid around inside when I put it down. A metallic scrape, like an object shifting against the tin lining. I didn't open it yet. I wish I had. I know some of you have held a box like that. The one thing a parent left you while somebody else grabbed the house. If that's you, tell me in the comments what was in yours. A ring, a Bible, an old watch. I want to hear it. Now back to that toolbox, and the woman who turned up at my motel door 3 days later. My Aunt Diane showed up at the Cedar Rest on a Wednesday evening, uninvited, with a container of potato soup and a mission. She was 61, my mom's younger sister, a retired school secretary who'd spent her whole life in Danvers. Fleece vest, orthopedic shoes, and a face working overtime to look sympathetic. I heard about the house, she said, settling onto the edge of the bed like she owned the place. Piper was at the little desk doing homework. Diane glanced at her once, then turned back to me. Danielle, honey, I know this feels unfair, but you have to understand, this is how it's always been done. Your father's father did the same. My own father did the same. Boys hold the land, girls marry out. There it was again. The family catechism, straight out of the book of Walt Hollister. Diane, I'm not married, I said. I've got a 6-year-old sleeping in a motel because my brother tossed our things in the rain. And that's awful. It is, but fighting it will only make things worse. She leaned in. I signed away my share of your grandfather's farm, 35 acres. Handed it to my brother because that's what was expected. And you know what? I got by, so will you. She said it like getting by was the ceiling. Like the highest thing a woman could hope for was to swallow the theft gracefully. Did you want those 35 acres, Diane? She blinked. For half a second, something honest crossed her face. A flicker of old anger, old loss, the kind that hardens into acceptance because the other option is too heavy to hold. "It doesn't matter what I wanted," she said. "What matters is what works." She left the soup. She left the advice. And she left me sitting in that motel room understanding, for the first time, that Diane wasn't just propping up the tradition. She was its oldest casualty. The next morning, I set my laptop up on the motel desk, brewed a pot of terrible in-room coffee, and went back to being Danielle Hollister, CPA, founder of a forensic practice that had billed $17 million in fees the previous year. Piper watched cartoons with the volume low while I reviewed a fraud referral from a manufacturing company up in Dayton. Numbers steadied me. They always had. Numbers don't play favorites. They don't care whether you're a son or a daughter. They just tell you what's true. At noon, I called Renee Bishop, my partner at the firm. Technically the managing partner now, since I'd sold my majority stake but kept an advisory role and a healthy chunk of equity. "How's small-town life?" she asked. "My brother sold off my father's tools, and my aunt brought me soup and a lecture about knowing my place. Charming. Do they still think you're a bookkeeper?" "They think I'm a bookkeeper who can't swing her own apartment." Renee went quiet a beat. "Then, Danielle, do they even know what you're worth?" I looked out at the parking lot. My Honda sat wedged between a pickup and a minivan. Nobody in Ashford Bend had ever seen the inside of my portfolio. Nobody had ever asked. "They never asked," I said. "And you never told them." "No." "Why?" I thought about it. The honest answer was tangled. Pride, stubbornness, the leftover sting of being told my career was a hobby. But the simplest version was this: because I shouldn't have to prove my worth to people who decided I had none before I could even talk. Renee let out a long breath. "Fair enough, but listen. If there's a reading, and if something's actually on the line, you might have to show those numbers whether you like it or not." 2 days before the reading, I drove past the house on Bellamy Road to check on my mother's garden. Old habit. The marigolds were already dying, nobody watering them, but that's not what stopped me. There was a man on the front porch, mid-40s, wearing a polo shirt with a bank logo stitched on the chest. He was talking to Trevor through the screen door, and Trevor's voice had a pitch I'd never heard out of him. Tight, defensive, almost begging. "The estate will cover it," Trevor was saying. "Once probate clears, I'll have access to everything. You'll get paid. Mr. Hollister, this is the 3rd notice we've sent. The balance on the 2nd mortgage is past due by." I said the estate will cover it. Then Trevor spotted me parked at the curb, and his face went from panic to fury in about 2 seconds. He shoved out the door, slammed the screen, and the banker retreated to his sedan without finishing the sentence. I didn't wave. I didn't say a thing. I just watched. A 2nd mortgage on the house Trevor was already treating like his own property. The house he'd thrown me out of. The house he swore was worth fighting for. Something my father used to say floated back to me. One of his less awful lines. "A man who borrows against his own foundation is a man standing on a trap door." I'd always figured he meant the shop, keeping the business debt-free. But sitting there watching that sedan roll off down Bellamy Road, I started to wonder if my dad had been talking about Trevor the whole time. I drove back to the motel. I didn't open the toolbox that night either. Something told me to wait until I was ready for whatever was inside. But I was running out of reasons to keep waiting. The night before the reading, I finally opened it. Piper was asleep. The room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge and the odd truck rolling by out on Highway 12. I set the green metal box on the bed and flipped the brass latch. Inside, a coping saw, a small block plane, a set of marking gauges. And underneath them, tucked against the tin lining like somebody had placed them there on purpose, 3 things that changed everything. The first was a carpenter's pencil. Not just any pencil. This one had been sharpened recently, and on the flat side, scratched in my father's cramped handwriting, were the letters WH to DH. Walt Hollister to Danielle Hollister. An arrow between them. A transfer, like he was handing something forward. The second was a brass key. Same shape as the one on my leather fob, the one that no longer opened the front door. But this one was different. Smaller, older. I turned it over and found a metal tag wired to the bow, the kind you'd see on a storage locker. Stamped into it, boat house back acres, not the house key, never the house key. This was the key to the boat house on those 22 acres along the river. The place my dad used to take me fishing. The place Piper called the River Place. The third thing was a folded document. I opened it with hands steadier than they had any right to be. A lien notice from Union Valley Bank. A second mortgage on the house at 9 Bellamy Road, dated 4 years back, for $355,000. My father's signature at the bottom. And in the margin, in pencil, 7 words. Danielle, ask Prude about the back acres. I read it twice. Then I picked up my phone and called Prude at 11 at night. He answered on the second ring, like he'd been sitting there waiting. You found the lien notice, he said, not a question. $355,000, I said, on the house. Your father took out a second mortgage 4 years ago to cover your brother's debts. Trevor's spec home venture collapsed. He'd overextended on 2 properties out in Bergen Hills, borrowed from private lenders at brutal rates. He was staring down personal bankruptcy. Your father co-signed the original loans, then refinanced everything against the house to consolidate it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the phone to my ear. So the house Trevor just kicked me out of is mortgaged to the hilt. The equity is next to nothing. The shop building carries a separate lien too, smaller, around $39,000, from a supplier Trevor never paid. Put it together, and the homestead parcel your brother is set to inherit comes with roughly $392,000 in secured debt against maybe $430,000 in value. He's inheriting a break-even at best, and only if the market holds, which right now is anything but guaranteed. I looked at the lien notice in my hand, my father's handwriting in the margin, and then he brought up the back acres. The 22 acres along the river are the only unencumbered asset in the whole estate. No liens, no mortgages. Appraised at about $1.35 million. Your father knew that if he simply left it to Trevor outright, it'd be leveraged inside of a year. So he added the condition. Both children submit certified financial statements and the land passes to whichever one can prove they can hold it free and clear. Dead hand control, I said. I knew the term. I'd seen it in estate cases. Exactly, and it's enforceable. Ohio probate courts uphold conditional bequests all the time. He paused. Your father learned something, Danielle, the hard way, but he learned it. I hung up and sat there a long while, holding the brass key in one hand and the pencil in the other. Prude called us both the next morning to lay out the requirement. Trevor's reaction was loud and instant. I could hear him even though Prude had us on separate lines. A financial statement? Fine. Happy to. I've got nothing to hide. He had plenty to hide. He had $392,000 of something to hide. But Trevor had spent his whole life mistaking confidence for competence, and this was no exception. He filed his statement with Prude by noon, then he called me. Just so you know, he said, and I could hear the grin, I already turned in my paperwork. That land is mine by sundown tomorrow. I stayed. I ran the shop. I carried the name. A piece of paper isn't going to undo 30 years of Dad telling this whole town who his heir was. Okay, I said. Bring your little pay stub, Danielle, or your W-2 or whatever it is you calculator people file. Doesn't matter. Dad's condition was a formality. He knew I'd clear it. He just wanted it on the record. Okay, I said again. That's all you've got, okay. What would you like me to say, Trevor? Silence. Then, I'd like you to say you understand the land was always meant to be mine. All of it. That's how this family works. That's how it's always worked. I looked at Piper, drawing a picture of a river at the motel desk with a green crayon. I understand exactly how this family works, I said. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and called Renee. I need a verified financial statement by 5 today. Full portfolio, CPA certified, net worth summary right on the front page. You're really doing this? I'm doing the last thing my father ever asked me to do. I'll have it in 3 hours. That night, after Piper fell asleep, I sat in the motel parking lot with the engine off and the windows down, listening to the river. The Ohio was half a mile off, but on still nights you could hear it, a low, steady sound like the whole town breathing. I didn't need those 22 acres. I had money. I had a career. I had a healthy, sharp little girl who'd be fine whether we lived in Cincinnati or on the moon. The rational part of me, the forensic accountant who ran cost-benefit math for a living, said walk away. Let Trevor have the land. Let him mortgage it, lose it, watch a bank auction it off. None of that was my problem. But the other part of me, the part that remembered Saturday mornings on the riverbank, my dad showing me how to tie a clinch knot, the sycamores going gold in October, the groan of the boat house door on its rusted hinges, that part wouldn't let go. My father had scratched my initials into a pencil. He'd tucked the boathouse key into the toolbox he left me. He'd written Ask Prout in the margin of a lien notice and buried it where only I would find it. Those weren't accidents. Those were instructions from a man who'd spent his whole life believing the wrong thing and had finally, too late, started to see it. I picked up my phone and texted Renee. Send the statement to Prout. She replied in under a minute. Already done. $6.24 million, certified by Delgado and Reyes, independent CPA, you're on record. I looked out toward the river. I wasn't doing this to beat Trevor. I was doing the last thing my father ever asked of me. And if it also happened to prove him wrong about everything he'd ever said about daughters, well, numbers don't lie. Bryn turned up at my motel door at 7 the next morning. She was dressed for brunch, not a lawyer's office. Silk top, linen slacks, a designer tote that cost more than a month of nights at the Cedar Rest. She had a manila envelope tucked under one arm. Can we talk for a second? She said, leaning on the door frame with a smile she'd clearly practiced in the car. Just us, woman to woman. I let her in. I wanted to hear the pitch. Piper was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. Bryn sat on the edge of the bed and slid a stack of papers out of the envelope. It's a quitclaim deed, she said, laying it on the comforter like she was dealing cards. Trevor asked me to bring it. You sign, you give up any claim to the estate, the house, the land, all of it. In return, Trevor hands you $18,000 and every one of Gail's photo albums. I looked at the document. 4 pages, sharp and freshly printed, already notarized on his end. He'd paid a lawyer to draw it up. He'd planned this move before the sun came up. 18,000, I said. Plus the pictures. It's a good deal, Danielle. The will's plainly in Trevor's favor. You'd burn more than that in legal fees just trying to fight it. This way everybody walks off clean. No mess, no bad blood. No bad blood, I repeated. Your husband dumped my daughter's shoes in a rainstorm. Her smile held, but her eyes flinched. Trevor gets carried away sometimes. He means well. He's under a lot of stress right now. I'll bet he is. I folded the deed back into thirds and pushed it toward her. I don't sign anything I haven't read on my own time, and I sure don't sign things somebody shoves at me in a motel room. If Trevor has an offer, he can run it through Prout. Bryn got to her feet. The warmth evaporated. You're making this way harder than it has to be. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'm just making it honest. She walked out and left the envelope behind. I dropped it in the trash on my way to pour Piper's cereal. Renee called at 8:30. Documents are at Prout's office. Certified, sealed, everything buttoned up. Delgado signed off on it himself. Then her tone shifted. Watch yourself in there. You know what happens when they crack that envelope open in front of a room that thinks you're broke, right? I knew. I'd run the whole thing in my head a dozen times. The accountant in me had already mapped every reaction. Trevor's disbelief. Bryn's panic. Diane's confusion. The numbers on that page told a story none of them had ever cared to read. $6.24 million, 2.6 from the sale of the firm, $2 million in diversified holdings, $1.2 million in commercial buildings, 2 little office properties in Cincinnati I'd bought and managed myself, $290,000 in retirement accounts, $150,000 in cash, every dollar of it built by me. No inheritance, no family money, no husband's paycheck. 17 years of being very good at the thing my family wrote off as a hobby. I'm ready for it, I said. You sure? I looked over at Piper, cross-legged on the bed, carefully braiding the ears of her stuffed rabbit like it was the most important task in the world. This kid had lived in a motel for 2 weeks because her uncle decided she didn't rate a bedroom in her own grandmother's house. She'd heard Bryn say it wasn't really her home. She'd packed her own backpack without being told because she was already learning what being a Hollister girl came with. You carry your own weight and nobody thanks you for it. I'm ready. Good, call me after. A pause. And Danielle, make them say the number out loud. I almost smiled. Almost. Prute's conference room smelled like lemon polish and old leather. A long walnut table sat in the middle, another piece my grandfather had built, and 6 chairs ringed it. A pitcher of water. 2 folders squared up neatly at the head, where Prute would sit. Trevor got there first. Charcoal suit, pocket square, a heavy watch throwing light around the room. He dropped into a chair like a man settling in to accept a trophy. Bryn slid in behind him, phone already out, probably drafting a caption for later. Diane came next, gripping her purse strap with both hands, wearing the same fleece vest she'd had on at the motel. She gave me one small nod and took the seat farthest from Trevor. I sat directly across from my brother. Piper was back at the motel with a sitter. Whatever this turned into, she didn't need to see it. In my bag, next to the carpenter's pencil, I could feel the weight of the brass key. And sitting there with the morning light stretching across the table, something I'd carried around for 2 decades finally clicked. The key my father gave me at 18, the one on the cracked leather fob, the one I'd tried in the front door the night Trevor swapped the locks, had never opened that house. It was too small, too old. The teeth were all wrong. It was the boathouse key, the key to the river place. My dad had handed me the key to those 22 acres when I was 18, and I'd spent 17 years thinking it was something else entirely. Prute came in, shut the door, and sat. He laid both hands flat on the folders. "We'll start with your father's will," he said. "Then we'll get to the final section." Trevor smirked. Prute opened the first folder. "Last will and testament of Walter James Hollister, revised 15 months ago, witnessed and notarized in Ashford County, Ohio." He read the boilerplate first, debts and funeral costs and the appointment of the executor, in the level voice of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Then he reached the distribution. "To my son, Trevor James Hollister, I leave the following: the residence at 9 Bellamy Road, Ashford Bend, Ohio, including all structures. The commercial property on Mill Street, known as Hollister and Son Woodworks, including all fixtures and remaining inventory. And all real property making up the homestead parcel, as recorded in Ashford County deed records." Trevor leaned back. He didn't grin. He did something worse. He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a fact he'd known his whole life. "To my daughter, Danielle Hollister, I leave my personal hand tools and toolbox." That was it. One line. 36 years of being Walt Hollister's daughter, boiled down to a dented green box and a set of chisels. Diane let out a soft breath. Bryn was already thumbing something into her phone. Trevor turned to me. "The land goes to the Hollister son," he said, and the words rang out like a bell he'd waited his whole life to strike. "I'm sorry it worked out this way, Danielle, but Dad made his call. He always made his call." I said nothing. I looked at Prute. Prute looked back at me with something close to patience. "Mr. Hollister," Prute said, "we're not done." Trevor waved a hand. "What's left? She got the toolbox, I got the house, it's finished." "It is not finished." Prute closed the first folder and set his palm on the second. "Your father's will has one final section, and the terms require me to read it aloud to both of you before any asset can transfer." Trevor's confidence didn't crack. It hardened. He actually stood up, pushed his chair back and rose like he was about to toast himself at his own coronation, and looked around the room. "A final section," he repeated. "Fine, read it. But let's all be honest about what's happening here." He jabbed a finger at me. "My sister walked out on this family at 18. She ran off to Cincinnati. Got herself a desk job punching numbers. She never ran the shop. Never maintained a thing, never carried the name. I did that, every year, every holiday. Every time a pipe burst or the roof leaked or Dad needed somebody to co-sign he stopped, caught himself. I stayed. She left. That's the math. That's always been the math." Then he turned to me with the full weight of 42 years of entitlement in his eyes. "Hope you enjoy being homeless, Danielle. I made sure you get nothing." The same line. The same script he'd read me over the phone. He was running it again, in front of witnesses now, like saying it enough times would make it stick. Bryn nodded along. Diane stared at the table. Prout waited. He waited like a man who'd already read the next page and knew exactly what was coming. When Trevor sat, Prout opened the second folder. The final section of Walter Hollister's will concerns a parcel that is not part of the homestead grant. Specifically, 22 acres of unencumbered riverfront land in Ashford County, including the structure known as the Boat House. Appraised at $1.35 million. Trevor blinked. Bryn's phone went still in her hand. Diane's head came up. This parcel, Prout went on, is subject to a conditional bequest. Your father attached a condition I'm now required to administer. He drew a single sheet from the folder. I recognized the paper, heavy cream stock, the kind used for documents meant to outlast everybody in the room. I'll read your father's words exactly as he wrote them, Prout said, and adjusted his glasses. I, Walter James Hollister, being of sound mind, direct that the 22-acre riverfront parcel, including all structures on it, shall not be distributed as part of the homestead grant. This land has been in the Hollister family for 4 generations. I have watched it held, improved, and cared for. I have also watched other assets in this family borrowed against, mortgaged, and nearly lost. I will not watch this land go the same way. Trevor shifted in his seat. Therefore, I direct my executor to require each of my children to submit a verified financial statement, prepared and certified by an independent CPA, showing their current net worth and their debts. The parcel shall pass to whichever child can prove the financial capacity to hold this land free and clear, without mortgaging it, borrowing against it, or placing any lien on it, for a minimum of 10 years. Prout paused. The only sound was the clock on the wall. If neither child meets this standard, the land shall be sold, and the proceeds given to the Ashford County Land Trust. He looked up and read the last 2 lines. I spent my life believing land passes to the son. I was wrong. Land doesn't go to the loudest voice in the room. It goes to whoever can hold on to it. That line landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. My father. The man who told me at 14 that I wasn't staying, who never once asked about my work, had sat alone in this lawyer's office and put those words on paper, knowing they'd outlive him. Diane made a small sound. Trevor said nothing. Prout set the page down. Both financial statements have been submitted. I'll review them now. He opened 2 sealed envelopes and laid them side by side. He took Trevor's first. Trevor James Hollister, verified financial statement, prepared by Bracken Accounting, Parkersburg, West Virginia. He scanned it. Total assets. Residence at 9 Bellamy Road, estimated value $430,000. Commercial property on Mill Street, estimated value $92,000. Vehicle and personal accounts, $12,600. He paused. Total liabilities. Second mortgage on 9 Bellamy Road, balance $312,000. Supplier lien on the Mill Street property, $39,000. Outstanding personal loans from private lenders, $198,000. Credit card obligations, $38,000. The numbers hung there like smoke. Net worth, Prout said, flat and precise. Negative $52,400. Trevor's jaw locked. Bryn's hand found his arm and gripped. That's temporary, Trevor said. The business is coming back. Those debts are getting restructured. Once the estate settles and I sell a couple of Mr. Hollister. Prout's voice was quiet and final. The condition requires demonstrated capacity at the time of filing, not projected future capacity, not optimistic forecasts. Your statement shows insolvency. The house is worth $430,000. It carries $355,000 in secured debt that you created and your father absorbed. You didn't inherit an asset. You inherited a lien. Trevor looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time since the funeral, maybe the first time in years. Not through me, not past me, at me, and I saw something on his face I'd never seen there before. Fear, not of me, of the number, of the arithmetic, of the simple, merciless fact that his whole life had been propped up on money that wasn't his, and now the tab had come due. Read hers, he said, hoarse. Read my sister's. Prout picked up the second envelope. Danielle Hollister. Verified financial statement prepared by Delgado and Reyes, independent CPA, Cincinnati, Ohio. He turned the page. The room was so quiet I could hear Diane breathing. Total assets. He read each line the way he read everything, even and unhurried, like a weather report. Equity stake in Hollister Forensic Group, post-sale, $2.6 million. Diversified investment portfolio, $2 million. Commercial real estate holdings, 2 properties in the Cincinnati area, $1.2 million. Retirement accounts, $290,000. Cash and liquid reserves, $150,000. Bryn made a sound, not a word, something between a gasp and a swallow, like the air had been knocked clean out of her. Total liabilities, Prout continued. 0, no outstanding debts, no mortgages, no liens, no encumbrances of any kind. He set the page down. Net worth $6,240,000. The number dropped into the room like a blast nobody heard coming. 6.24 million. Every dollar earned, every dollar mine. Trevor stared at me. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. Diane pressed a hand over her own lips. Bryn had gone completely still, her phone forgotten in her lap, her face the color of old paper. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I laid my hand on the carpenter's pencil in my bag, the one scratched WH to DH, and I waited. Under the terms of your father's conditional bequest, Prout said, Danielle Hollister is the only qualifying beneficiary. The 22-acre riverfront parcel, including the boat house, passes to Danielle. He turned to my brother. Mr. Hollister, do you have any questions? Trevor's hands were splayed flat on the table, fingers spread like he was trying to hold himself down to the surface of the earth. His face had gone white. His breathing was fast and shallow and wrong. 6, he whispered. 6 million. 6.24, Prout corrected, because Harold Prout was a man who believed in precision. And then my brother's eyes rolled back and he went down. He caught the chair on the way, and the chair banged the table, and the water pitcher tipped and rolled across the walnut my grandfather had built 60 years ago, water spreading around the folders like a slow tide. Bryn screamed, short and sharp, more startle than grief, and lunged for him. Diane shot up so fast her purse hit the floor, coins scattering across the boards. Prout's assistant was already dialing. He's breathing, she said, kneeling with 2 fingers on his wrist. Pulse is fast but steady. Probably just fainted. I stayed in my chair. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction or any of the things you might expect from a woman watching the man who put her daughter's shoes out in the rain collapse on a lawyer's floor because a piece of paper told him the truth about his sister. What I felt was tired. The specific exhaustion of somebody who'd spent 36 years being underestimated and had just watched the estimate come due. Bryn was fanning Trevor with a folder. Diane stood against the wall, both hands pressed to her cheeks, staring at nothing. Prout sat at the head of the table, hands folded, waiting with the calm of a man who'd seen people faint before and would see it again. I reached into my bag and took out the brass key on its cracked leather fob. I set it on the table, next to the pooling water, next to the folders, next to the wreckage of my brother's certainty. The boat house key. The key to the river place. The key my father handed me at 18 the day I left when he said, for when you come home. I'd come home, and the land had come with me. The paramedics got there in about 10 minutes. By then Trevor was sitting up, a cold cloth on his forehead, Bryn hovering beside him like a bodyguard who'd been caught napping. They checked his blood pressure, shone a light in his eyes, told him to see his doctor. He refused a ride to the hospital. Of course he did. Hollister men don't ride in ambulances. When the EMTs left, Trevor looked at me across the table with an expression I'd never seen on him. Not anger, not confidence. Something raw and coming apart like a wall with the plaster stripped off. You knew, he said. You sat there and you knew. I knew I'd built a career, I knew I'd earned my money. I didn't know it would matter in this room until a week ago. You hid it, you let me, his voice broke. You wanted me to look like a fool. You looked like whatever you chose to look like, Trevor. I didn't make a single choice for you. His jaw trembled. Then the self-pity showed up, right on schedule. I stayed and I ran the shop and I did everything Dad asked. I gave everything to this family. And now I'm underwater and you're sitting on $6 million and the land's going to someone who won't lose it, a voice said. And that wasn't Danielle, that was your father. Everyone turned. Diane was still against the wall, arms crossed, tears sliding quietly into the lines around her mouth. I gave up 35 acres, she said, her voice thin. Signed it over to my brother because that was the rule. Boys keep the land, and it ate my whole life, Trevor, that rule ate my whole life. She dragged the back of her hand across her face. Your father was wrong. My father was wrong, and I was wrong for sitting in that motel telling Danielle to just take it. She looked at me. I'm sorry. And I believed she meant it. But meaning it and having done something about it were two very different things, and Diane knew that as well as I did. 3 months later, the house on Bellamy Road went into foreclosure. Trevor couldn't cover the second mortgage, the one my father had taken out to save him in the first place, and the bank filed in November. Bryn moved out a couple of weeks before the sheriff's sale. She took the flat-pack cabinets she'd bolted in over my grandfather's originals. She left the stained glass transom above the front door because it was too heavy to haul. Trevor challenged the conditional bequest. His lawyer filed a motion. Prout answered with the will, the condition, both verified statements and an 8-page brief on Ohio case law about conditional bequests. The motion got tossed in 16 days. The judge's ruling ran a single paragraph. It ended with, "The testator's condition is clear, lawful, and enforceable." Trevor stopped calling me after that. Diane sent a card at Christmas. No note inside, just her name. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it out either. Some debts take longer to settle than others. In January, I drove Piper down to the river place for the first time since the reading. The sycamores were bare, the river ran high and gray, and the boathouse door stuck on its hinges the way it always had. I used the brass key. It turned smooth and easy, like it had been waiting the whole time. Inside were my father's fishing rods, a folding chair, a coffee can full of hooks and sinkers, and the smell of cedar. The same cedar from the shop, from the toolbox, from every Saturday morning I'd spent out here as a kid, back before my dad decided I wasn't worth his time. Piper ran down to the water's edge and started throwing rocks. I sat on the boathouse steps and sharpened the carpenter's pencil with a pocket knife. WH to DH. I drew a line on a scrap of wood, the first line of a plan for a little workshop I'd build out here for her, a place where her name would mean something. Trevor had told me to enjoy being homeless. I looked out at 22 acres of clear, unencumbered riverfront, and my daughter throwing stones into the current, and the door my father's key had opened without a fight. I was home.